My name is Renee, and I am 29 years old, working as a finance manager for a consulting firm in Boston. All my life, I had been the reliable daughter, the one who always showed up, especially for my parents and their hardware store business. That all changed with one voicemail that still echoes in my head. Don't bother coming, we're cutting ties. After everything I had done for them, including co-signing their business loan, I simply texted back, understood. What they didn't know was what I would do next. Before we get into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if family drama resonates with you. Growing up in our small coastal Maine town, family meant everything to us. My parents, Thomas and Elaine Peterson, opened their hardware store when I was just 5 years old. I still remember the smell of fresh paint and wood on opening day. How proudly my father stood behind the counter in his brand new apron with the Peterson's Hardware logo stitched across the front. My mother had designed it herself, staying up late for weeks to perfect every detail of their dream. From the beginning, I was fascinated by the business. While other kids played with dolls, I played store, carefully arranging my toys on makeshift shelves and writing price tags in my childish scrawl. By age 10, I was helping out after school, counting inventory, and eventually learning to work the register. My parents would beam with pride whenever customers commented on how professional I was for my age. Our Renee has a head for business, my father would say, ruffling my hair affectionately. She'll take over someday and make this place even better than we could imagine. My brother Jake was different. 2 years older than me, he found the hardware store boring and would complain whenever he was asked to help. He preferred sports and hanging out with friends, viewing the family business as a burden rather than the legacy my parents hoped it would become. Why would anyone want to spend their life selling nails and paint, he would grumble. My parents would exchange worried glances but never pushed him too hard, always making excuses for his lack of interest. Jake just needs time to find his path, Mom would say though. I could hear the disappointment in her voice. As we grew older, the divide became more pronounced. Jake left for college and rarely came home, pursuing a business degree that he never quite finished before dropping out to explore opportunities in different cities. Meanwhile, I chose to study finance at Boston University specifically to help modernize our family business. During college, I would come home every other weekend to help my parents update their accounting systems and organize their finances. I created spreadsheets to track inventory, implemented a digital point-of-sale system, and helped them establish an online presence that brought in customers from neighboring towns. After graduation, I landed a position at a financial consulting firm in Boston, but maintained my close connection to home. Every Friday evening, I would make the 3-hour drive north to spend weekends with my parents, dedicating hours to reviewing their books and suggesting improvements. They relied on me completely for the financial side of the business, often saying they couldn't have expanded without my guidance. And expand they did. What started as a modest corner store had grown into the largest hardware supplier in 3 counties. By my 28th birthday, Peterson's Hardware was thriving with plans to renovate and possibly open a second location in a neighboring town. We couldn't have done any of this without you, Renee. My father told me during a celebratory dinner for their 20th business anniversary, "You have been our rock." That was when they first mentioned the loan. The expansion would require significant capital, and while the business was profitable, they needed additional financing to make their dreams a reality. "The bank wants a co-signer with strong credit," my mother explained, looking at me hopefully over her wine glass. "Your father and I have good credit, but with the business debt, they're hesitant to approve the full amount we need." I felt a flutter of unease. "That's a big commitment," I said carefully. "Co-signing would tie my credit to the business completely." "We know it's asking a lot," my father acknowledged, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "But who else can we trust with something this important? You know the business inside and out." I hesitated, weighing my options. I had been planning to buy my own condo in Boston, and this would potentially delay that goal. But looking at their hopeful faces, the people who had supported me through everything, how could I say no? "All right," I agreed finally. "I'll co-sign the loan, but I want to be involved in all the financial decisions going forward to make sure everything stays on track." They agreed enthusiastically, and we toasted to the future of Peterson's Hardware. In that moment, I felt secure in my place within the family and the business. I was valued, needed, and loved. If only I had recognized the early warning signs. The way my mother sometimes deferred to my father on decisions we had previously made together. The occasional comment about how family should always come first when I mentioned work commitments in Boston. The subtle guilt trips when I couldn't make it home for a weekend. These were tiny cracks in what I believed was an unbreakable foundation, cracks that would soon split wide open with my brother's unexpected return. It was an ordinary Sunday dinner when Jake announced he was moving back to town. He arrived at our parents' house, unannounced, suitcases in his car, and a winning smile on his face. I had driven up from Boston as usual for our family dinner, unprepared for the surprise that awaited me. "The prodigal son returns," he declared dramatically as he walked through the door, arms spread wide for embraces. My parents were ecstatic. Mum cried tears of joy while Dad couldn't stop clapping Jake on the back. I was genuinely happy too, despite our differences. It had been nearly 3 years since Jake had visited for more than a rushed holiday appearance. Over pot roast, my mother's specialty, Jake shared stories of his time away, painting a picture of entrepreneurial ventures and valuable experience gained, though I noticed he never quite explained why none of these opportunities had worked out. "So what brings you back?" I asked during a pause in his narrative. Jake glanced at our parents before answering. "I've been thinking a lot about family lately, about roots and legacy." He reached for our mother's hand. "I realized that what Mum and Dad have built here is special, and I want to be part of it." The joy on my parents' faces was unmistakable. Dad raised his glass in a toast. "To family and the future of Peterson's Hardware," he said, voice thick with emotion. That night, as we cleared the dishes together, Jake mentioned casually, "I've been learning a lot about retail expansion strategies. I have some ideas that could really take the store to the next level." I nodded, trying to be supportive. "That's great. I've actually put together some projections for the renovation and potential second location. Maybe we could review them together tomorrow before I head back to Boston." "Sure thing, sis," he agreed, though something in his tone felt dismissive. The next morning, I brought my laptop to breakfast, ready to share my carefully researched plans. But Jake dominated the conversation with his own ideas about modernization and expansion, ideas that sounded remarkably similar to proposals I had made months ago. "What if we created a contractor's loyalty program?" Jake suggested enthusiastically. "Give discounts to regular professionals to secure their business." "That's exactly what Renee suggested last year," Mum said, but then quickly added, "But we could certainly revisit it now that you're here to help implement it." I felt a strange twinge of discomfort, but pushed it aside. What mattered was the business moving forward, not who got credit for the ideas. As weeks passed, the dynamic shifted subtly. My weekend visits, once filled with meaningful work and decision-making, became increasingly social. Instead of reviewing financials with my parents, I found myself included in general family activities, while Jake took my place in the back office. "You work so hard all week, Renee," my mother said when I questioned this. "We thought you deserved some relaxation when you visit now that Jake can handle some of the business discussions." Then came the first major slight. The bank had scheduled a meeting to discuss the loan details, and I had arranged to take a Friday off work to attend. Thursday evening, I called home to confirm the time. "Oh," my mother sounded flustered. "We actually moved the meeting to yesterday. Jake thought it would be better to get it done sooner." "But I'm a co-signer," I said, stunned. "I should have been there." "It was just a preliminary discussion," she explained quickly. "Nothing was finalized." Jake took excellent notes, and the loan officer seemed very impressed with his market growth strategy. That weekend, I discovered Jake had been given an official position as expansion manager, a role created specifically for him. When I arrived at the store Saturday morning, he was seated at a new desk in the office, the space reorganized to accommodate him. "Isn't it wonderful having both our children involved in the business?" My father beamed, seemingly oblivious to my confusion. I waited until we were alone that evening to bring up my concerns. "I feel like I'm being pushed out of decisions I should be part of," I told my parents as we sat in the living room after dinner. Jake had gone out with old friends, giving me the opportunity to speak freely. "Don't be ridiculous," my father dismissed immediately. "Nothing has changed." "Everything has changed," I countered. The bank meeting, the office reorganization, even the contractor loyalty program that was my idea is now being credited to Jake. My mother sighed. "I think you're being a bit sensitive, dear. Jake is just enthusiastic about being involved. We're still grateful for everything you do." "But that's just it," I persisted. "What exactly am I doing now? It feels like my role is being erased." "Nobody is erasing anything," my father said firmly, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. "But this business is here in town, and you're in Boston most of the time. It makes sense for Jake to take on more responsibility since he's local now." I left that night feeling confused and hurt, wondering if I was, indeed, being too sensitive. But as I drove back to Boston, a creeping realization formed in the back of my mind that something fundamental had shifted in my family dynamic and not in my favor. The next 2 months brought a steady erosion of my position within both the family and the business. Each weekend visit revealed new changes implemented without my knowledge or input. 4 weeks after Jake's return, I arrived to find they had replaced the accounting software I had carefully selected and set up with a system Jake preferred. All the historical data had been migrated over with several errors in the process that took me hours to identify and fix. Jake says this new system integrates better with suppliers, my father explained when I questioned the change. It was a bit messy during the transition, but we're figuring it out. What hurt most was how they now deferred to Jake in meetings, looking to him first for opinions, even on financial matters that had always been my domain. During a supplier negotiation, I attended my suggestion to leverage our payment history for better terms was openly contradicted by Jake. Actually, we should extend our payment window rather than shorten it, he countered smoothly. It gives us more cash flow flexibility, but it will cost more in the long run and could damage our excellent vendor relationships, I pointed out. Knowing our suppliers valued prompt payment, my father nodded thoughtfully before saying, Jake makes a good point about cash flow. Let's try his approach. I bit my tongue, maintaining professional composure while feeling increasingly invisible. Later that evening, I called my longtime friend Sarah, who had grown up in our town and knew my family well. Am I going crazy? I asked her after explaining the situation. Am I just being territorial because Jake is finally showing interest in the business? There was a long pause before Sarah answered carefully. Renee, I wasn't going to say anything, but Jake has been talking around town, telling people he had to come back because you were too busy with your Boston life to give the business the attention it needed. My stomach dropped. What? He's been implying that he's saving the family business, she continued reluctantly, making it sound like your involvement was minimal and that their expansion plans were your idea, but you didn't have the skills to implement them. The betrayal stung sharply. Not just from Jake, whose competitive nature I had always known, but from my parents, who were allowing this narrative to form without correction. The following weekend, while organizing some files in the office during a quiet moment alone, I discovered financial projections for the second store that contained alarming irregularities. The revenue forecasts were wildly optimistic, expenses were significantly underestimated, and the break-even point calculation ignored several major cost factors. When I brought these concerns to my parents, showing them the realistic numbers alongside Jake's projections, the conversation quickly turned heated. These projections are fundamentally unsound, I explained, trying to keep my tone professional rather than accusatory. They're setting unrealistic expectations for the bank and for the business planning. We need to revise them before making any commitments. Jake walked in midway through my explanation. What's going on? He asked, immediately defensive upon seeing the papers spread across the table. Renee has some concerns about your projections. My father said, his tone suggesting my worries were an inconvenience rather than legitimate business considerations. Jake glanced at my notes and scoffed. Your models are outdated. You're thinking too small, too conservatively. He turned to our parents. This is exactly what I was worried about. Renee is so used to her corporate risk aversion that she can't see the potential here. I'm not risk-averse, I defended myself. I'm trying to prevent us from overextending based on fantasy numbers. See? Jake threw up his hands. She doesn't believe in what we're building. She's been away so long she doesn't understand our local market anymore. That's not fair, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I've been involved in this business my entire life. My mother interrupted. Please, let's not argue. Jake, your sister, has a point about being careful with projections. But, Jake prompted, clearly expecting her to continue. But, she sighed, we do need to think bigger for this expansion to work. The conservative approach hasn't gotten us a second location in 20 years. I felt as though I'd been slapped. The conservative approach, she dismissed, had kept their business stable through 2 recessions and built their excellent credit rating. It was the foundation of everything they had achieved. The argument ended unresolved, with tension hanging heavy in the air. That night alone in my childhood bedroom, I scrolled through my calendar and realized with a pang that my birthday had come and gone the previous week without acknowledgement from my family. For 30 years, even during college when I couldn't come home, there had always been a celebration, even if just a phone call and a card. This year, silence. The following morning, I discovered I had been removed from the business email chain. A notification about a bounced message led me to call our IT support person, who confirmed awkwardly that my address had been removed from the distribution list per management request. That night in my Boston apartment, I finally broke down. Sitting on my kitchen floor back against the refrigerator, I sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes burned. The systematic erasure of my contributions, the revision of the family narrative to minimize my role, the casual dismissal of my expertise all pointed to one painful conclusion: I was being pushed out of my family. Yet something inside me refused to go quietly. I decided to make one last attempt at reconciliation, to try once more to make my parents see what was happening before the rift became permanent. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' house with a peace offering a family photo album I had digitized and enhanced as a surprise gift. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Jake's car already there earlier than usual for our family dinners. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I walked up to the house I had always considered home. Through the front window, I could see my parents and Jake huddled around the dining table, papers spread between them, engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion. When I knocked and entered, the conversation halted abruptly, papers hastily gathered and tucked into a folder. "Renee, we weren't expecting you so early," my mother said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I thought I'd come help with dinner prep," I explained, noticing how my father avoided eye contact. "What were you all discussing?" "Just some business matters," Jake answered smoothly. "Nothing urgent?" Throughout dinner, conversation felt strained and artificial. My parents asked perfunctory questions about my work week, while Jake dominated the discussion with stories about local connections he was rebuilding and improvements he had already implemented at the store. As we cleared the dessert plates, Jake cleared his throat dramatically. "Actually, I have some exciting news to share." He looked at our parents with a grin. "I think it's time we told Renee about the new developments." "Kang." My mother nodded encouragingly, while my father smiled broadly for the first time that evening. "We've found the perfect location for our second store," Jake announced triumphantly. "An old warehouse space just outside of Brunswick. The owner is a golf buddy of Dad's and has given us first rights to purchase before it goes on the market." I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. "You've already found a location. I thought we were still in the planning phase." "Plans have accelerated," my father said. "The opportunity was too good to pass up. We've already put down a refundable deposit to hold it," Jake added. "With what funds?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. "And what about the market analysis we discussed, the demographic studies, the competition evaluation?" "Jake has connections with a market research firm that fast-tracked the analysis," my mother explained. "Everything checked out wonderfully. Can I see the reports?" I asked. An uncomfortable silence followed before Jake responded. "They're still finalizing the written reports, but the verbal assessments were extremely positive." Warning bells rang in my mind. No reputable firm would provide major investment guidance without detailed written analysis. "So you've committed funds based on verbal assurances. That's not how business decisions of this magnitude should be made." Jake's expression hardened. "Just because it's not how your corporate bosses do things doesn't mean it's wrong. This is how real business happens in the real world, through relationships and trust, not endless paperwork. The real world is where real businesses fail every day because of rushed decisions and inadequate planning." I countered, feeling my carefully maintained composure slipping. "As the CO signer on the expansion loan, I have serious concerns about this approach." My father's face darkened. "The loan is already in process." The bank was very impressed with Jake's presentation. "What presentation?" I asked, my voice rising. "When did this happen?" "Last Wednesday," my mother admitted quietly. "Jake thought it would be more efficient to move forward rather than wait for your availability." The betrayal cut deep. I made myself available for every meeting related to this loan. I rearranged my work schedule repeatedly. "I am the co-signer, which means my financial future is tied to this decision, and you deliberately excluded me from a critical meeting with the bank." "You're overreacting," Jake said dismissively. "Everything is proceeding exactly as it should for a business expansion." "No, it's not," I insisted, turning to my parents. "Can't you see what's happening here? Jake has systematically pushed me out of every business decision since he returned. He's undermined my contributions, taken credit for my ideas, and now he's making financial commitments that affect my credit without my involvement." "That's enough!" My father slammed his hand on the table. "Jake is here every day pouring his heart into this business, while you drive up from Boston on weekends when it's convenient for you." "Convenient?" I echoed incredulously. I've driven 3 hours each way every weekend for years to help with this business. I've structured my entire career around supporting Peterson's hardware. And we've appreciated that, my mother interjected, but Jake is bringing fresh energy and ideas that we need right now. Fresh ideas like rushing into property purchases without proper analysis, like alienating suppliers by extending payment terms, like submitting fantasy projections to the bank that we can never meet. My voice broke as I fought back tears of frustration. I think you're jealous, Jake said quietly, his tone calculated to sound reasonable and concerned. You've been the golden child for so long that you can't handle sharing the spotlight. This isn't about sharing anything, I shot back. This is about reckless business decisions that put everything our parents have built at risk. My father stood up abruptly. I won't listen to you attack your brother this way. He came back when we needed him, while you've been building your separate life in Boston. A life I built while still supporting this family, I protested, my composure finally shattering completely. A life that allowed me to have the credit score that made your expansion loan possible in the first place. Maybe my father said coldly, you should stay away for a while until you can be supportive of this family's decisions. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. My mother looked down at her hands, saying nothing in my defense. Jake wore an expression of practiced concern that couldn't quite mask his satisfaction. Without another word, I grabbed my purse and left tears blurring my vision as I drove back to Boston that night instead of staying over as planned. I cried the entire 3-hour drive, vacillating between hurt anger and disbelief that my family could turn on me so completely. The next morning, I discovered my business email access had been completely revoked when trying to log in remotely to check inventory levels, as I had done for years. No warning, no explanation, just access denied. Then came the voicemail that would change everything. My father's voice, cold and final. Renee, your mother and I have discussed things further. We think it's best if we make a clean break for now. Don't bother coming this weekend or for a while after that. We're cutting ties until you can accept the new direction of the business and your brother's role in it. Jake will be handling everything from now on. I sat at my kitchen table, phone in hand, listening to the message 3 times to make sure I had heard correctly. After everything I had done, after all the years of support and sacrifice, I was being discarded because I had raised legitimate concerns about their financial future. My hands shook as I typed a single-word reply to the voicemail, understood. Then, with a strange calm that settled over me like a protective shield, I opened my laptop and began researching my rights and obligations as a co-signer on their business loan. The sense of calm that came over me after receiving my father's voicemail wasn't resignation, it was clarity. For the first time in months, I saw my situation with perfect objectivity. My family had made their choice, prioritizing Jake's charismatic promises over my proven loyalty and financial expertise. Now I needed to make choices that protected my own future. Monday morning, I called in sick to work something I rarely did. Instead of going to the office, I made an appointment with Patricia Winters, a business attorney recommended by a colleague. In her downtown office, with its view of the Boston Harbor, I laid out my situation, bringing copies of all the loan documents I had prudently saved. Let me understand clearly, Patricia said, reviewing the papers through reading glasses. You co-signed this business expansion loan for your parents' hardware store. Now they've excluded you from business decisions, including meetings with the bank, while proceeding with expansion plans you believe are financially unsound. Exactly. I confirmed. My name and credit are attached to a loan being used in ways I never agreed to and believe are risky. She nodded thoughtfully. As a co-signer, you have certain rights, but also significant exposure. If they default, the bank will come after both you and your parents equally. What are my options? I asked. You can petition to remove yourself as a co-signer, but it would require the bank's agreement, which they're unlikely to give, if the business's financial position has weakened, she explained. However, since the loan was approved with your credit history as a significant factor, and if you can demonstrate that material changes have occurred since you signed, you might have grounds to request reconsideration. I spent the next 2 days gathering evidence. I compiled emails showing my systematic exclusion from business decisions. I documented the accounting software change that had created errors in the financial tracking. Most damaging of all, I had screenshots of the original business projections we had submitted to the bank alongside the new, wildly optimistic numbers Jake had created. On Wednesday, I requested a meeting with Marcus Daniels, the loan officer who had handled the Petersons' hardware account for years and knew my role in the business well. Initially hesitant to meet without my parents present, He agreed when I emphasized that, as a co-signer, I had legitimate concerns about the loan security. Marcus, I've valued our professional relationship over the years. I began once seated in his office, which is why I felt it was important to bring some recent developments to your attention. I explained the situation as factually as possible, presenting my documentation without emotional commentary. His expression grew increasingly concerned as he reviewed the materials. These new projections, he said, tapping the papers Jake had created, are significantly more aggressive than what we based our loan approval on. Yes, I agreed. And they're being used to justify a property purchase that wasn't part of the original expansion plan we discussed. Marcus frowned. This changes the risk profile considerably, and you're saying you've been removed from business operations despite being a co-signer. Completely removed. No access to business accounts or emails, excluded from bank meetings, and explicitly told not to come to the business anymore. After further discussion, Marcus explained my options. The simplest was to formally request removal as a co-signer based on material changes to the business plan and my exclusion from operations. This would trigger a review of the loan terms and likely require my parents to find another guarantor or provide additional collateral. I understand this is a difficult family situation, Marcus said sympathetically, but from a banking perspective, we approved this loan based partly on your financial stability and ongoing involvement. These changes represent significant deviation from those conditions. The decision weighed heavily on me, but by the end of our meeting, I had signed the formal request for removal from the loan. Marcus assured me he would handle the matter discreetly, but warned that my parents would be notified within 24 hours of the bank's decision to reevaluate the loan terms. That evening, I changed my personal phone number, something I had contemplated for weeks but hesitated to do. I sent brief emails to the few extended family members and hometown friends I wanted to stay in contact with, providing my new number and asking them to keep it private. Before the number change took effect, a barrage of texts came from Jake. "What did you say to the bank?" Followed by, "Dad just got a concerning call from Marcus," and finally, "You're really showing your true colours now." I didn't respond to any of them. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. I returned to work, focusing on my clients with renewed dedication, finding solace in the straightforward nature of financial analysis where numbers didn't lie and decisions were based on facts rather than family politics. My friend Sarah called on my new number reporting that there were rumours of trouble at Peterson's Hardware. "Your dad was at the bank for hours yesterday," she told me, "and Jake's been telling people there's a temporary delay in the expansion plans." I felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, that the bank had apparently taken my concerns seriously, guilt at causing disruption to my parents' business, but predominantly a growing sense of relief that I had protected myself from financial disaster. A week after my meeting with Marcus, the storm finally broke. My phone lit up with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, but area codes I knew belonged to my hometown. I let them go to voicemail. There were 6 in total, 3 from my father and 3 from my mother now, their tone evolving from angry accusations to desperate pleas. "How could you do this to your family?" my father demanded in the first message. "The bank is freezing our loan pending review because of you," came the second. By the third, "Renee, please call us back. We need to talk about how to fix this situation." My mother's messages were more emotional. "Sweetheart, please reconsider what you're doing," she begged. "This business is our whole life." I listened to each message carefully, allowing myself to feel the hurt, but not letting it overtake the clarity I had fought so hard to achieve. When the last message finished, I texted Sarah. "I think it's time. Can we meet at Coastal Coffee tomorrow at 2? She agreed, and I made arrangements to take Friday off work for a day trip to Maine, not to my parents' house, but to neutral ground in our hometown. The drive to Maine felt different this time. Instead of the anticipatory tension that had characterized my weekend trips in recent months, I felt a strange sense of purpose and resolve. The Coastal coffee shop where I had arranged to meet my parents was bustling with Friday afternoon customers when I arrived. Sarah had helped arrange the meeting, telling my parents I was willing to talk, but only in public and only with both of them, no Jake. I spotted them immediately upon entering, seated at a corner table far from the counter, looking smaller somehow than I remembered. My father, always proud and commanding in his store, appeared deflated, while my mother's eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "Thank you for coming," I said formally as I sat down across from them, declining the hug my mother half rose to offer. "You've put us in an impossible position. My father began immediately, his voice low but intense. The bank has frozen our expansion funding. They're requiring a full financial review and threatening to call in the existing portion of the loan. I met his gaze steadily. I removed myself from a financial arrangement that had fundamentally changed without my consent or knowledge. As a finance professional, and as someone whose credit was on the line, I had every right to do that. "But we're your family," my mother interjected, her voice breaking. "How could you hurt us this way?" "That's exactly the question I've been asking myself for months," I replied. "How could you hurt me by erasing my contributions, excluding me from decisions, allowing Jake to take credit for my work, and ultimately cutting me out completely? How could you do that to your daughter who has supported you and the business faithfully for years?" "We never meant to hurt you," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "Intentions don't change impacts," I stated calmly. "You chose to believe Jake's version of events over mine. You chose to exclude me from business meetings I had a right to attend. Dad, you chose to leave me that voicemail telling me not to come home anymore. Those were active choices, not misunderstandings." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We were frustrated. You weren't supporting Jake's vision for the business." "Because his vision wasn't based in financial reality," I countered. "And now the bank agrees with me." I removed a folder from my bag and placed it on the table. "These are the documents I provided to Marcus showing the discrepancies between our original loan application projections and Jake's new numbers." My father glanced at the papers but didn't touch them. Jake explained that his projections were more aggressive but achievable. "They weren't achievable, they were fantasy," I said firmly, "and I have more documentation." I placed another folder on the table. "This contains evidence of potentially fraudulent alterations to business records over the past 2 months. Expenses, recategorized revenue, artificially inflated inventory adjustments that don't match purchase orders." My mother gasped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Jake has been manipulating the books to make his performance look better than it is and to justify the expansion pace he wanted." I kept my voice even despite the gravity of the accusation. "I noticed discrepancies before I was cut off from the systems and I documented everything." "This can't be right," my father insisted, though doubt had begun to creep into his expression. "Have you checked the business accounts recently?" I asked. "The actual balances against what's reported in the system." They exchanged a look that confirmed my suspicions. "There have been some cash flow issues," my father admitted reluctantly. "Jake said it was normal during an expansion phase." "It's not normal to have cash disappear," I stated. "When was the last time you saw the complete bank statements?" Another uncomfortable silence before my mother whispered, "Jake has been handling all the banking." I took a deep breath. "Where is Jake now, today specifically?" "He said he had meetings with suppliers in Portland," my father answered. "Have you verified that called any of the suppliers?" My father's face flushed with anger, but I could see it wasn't directed at me anymore. "What exactly are you suggesting, Renee?" "I'm suggesting you check all your accounts immediately, and I'm suggesting you consider the possibility that Jake's sudden interest in the family business had nothing to do with legacy or family connection." My mother began to cry in earnest now. "Jake wouldn't steal from us. He's our son." "I hope I'm wrong," I said sincerely. "But the patterns I've seen are consistent with someone setting up for a significant cash extraction before disappearing. The rushed expansion, the isolation of people who might notice problems, the manipulation of financial records, the exclusive control of banking. These are red flags any financial auditor would recognize." My father pulled out his phone with shaking hands and logged into the business banking app. I watched as the color drained from his face. "The equipment fund is empty," he said hoarsely, "and there's a $50,000 withdrawal from yesterday. Cash." "I'm so sorry," I said, genuinely pained to see my fears confirmed. "Will you help us fix this?" my mother pleaded, reaching for my hand across the table. "Will you come back and help put things right?" I gently withdrew my hand. "I can't sign back onto the loan," I said firmly. "That chapter is closed. My financial future can't be tied to the business anymore." "But we'll lose everything without that loan," my father protested. "The bank made it clear we need a co-signer with your credit rating." "That's not my responsibility anymore," I replied, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. "You made your choice when you cut me out, when you decided Jake's untested ideas were more valuable than my years of proven commitment." "We made a terrible mistake," my mother admitted. "We were blinded by having our son back by his charm and his big promises." "Yes, you were," I agreed. "And that mistake has consequences. I'm not going to sacrifice my financial security to fix it." "Then why even meet with us?" my father asked bitterly. "Just to say I told you so." "No," I said, gathering my folders and standing up, "to get closure, to say goodbye properly, not through a cold voicemail, and to give you this information so you can decide what to do about Jake before more damage is done." Kato. As I walked towards the door, my mother called after me, "Renee, please. We're still your family." I turned back one last time. Family doesn't throw you away when someone with better stories comes along. Family doesn't exclude you from decisions that affect your future. Family doesn't cut ties because you raised valid concerns. I softened my tone slightly. "I hope you rebuild from this. I truly do. But it will have to be without my name on your loans." Walking to my car, I felt the weight of decades of family expectations lift from my shoulders. For the first time in my adult life, I was making a decision based solely on what was right for me, not what would keep peace in the family or support my parents' dreams. It hurt deeply and genuinely, but beneath the pain was a newfound sense of strength I hadn't known I possessed. 6 months can change everything. As spring turned to summer, I found myself transformed in ways I never expected. The painful separation from my family initially felt like an amputation, a constant throbbing absence that coloured everything in my life. But gradually, like any healing process, the acute pain gave way to something more manageable, then to moments of genuine peace. 2 weeks after our confrontation at the coffee shop, I began seeing a therapist specialising in family trauma. Dr. Melissa Gardiner helped me understand that my worth wasn't tied to my usefulness to my family, that healthy love doesn't demand self-sacrifice as proof of loyalty. "You're grieving not just the loss of your current relationship with your parents," she explained during one particularly insightful session, "but also the idealized version of family you always believed you had." Those words unlocked something in me. I had built my identity around being the reliable daughter, the family problem solver. Without that role, who was I? The journey to answer that question became my focus. I established clear boundaries about communication. After the coffee shop meeting, I had blocked my parents' numbers, needing space to process. 3 months later, I unblocked them, but established rules through email about how and when we could speak. No discussions about the business, no guilt trips, no mentions of Jake, who had indeed disappeared. According to Sarah, he had cleared out the remaining accessible business funds and vanished the same day I met with my parents. Local police were investigating, but he had a significant head start. Meanwhile, I channeled my energy into rebuilding my life on my terms. I accepted a promotion at work that I had previously hesitated to pursue because it would require more travel, further limiting my weekend availability for family visits. My colleagues noticed the change in me, commenting on my increased confidence in meetings and willingness to challenge flawed ideas even from superiors. "Whatever happened over the past few months," my boss remarked during my performance review, "has unleashed the leader we always knew was in there." I also created space for new relationships. I joined a weekly hiking group, reconnected with college friends I had lost touch with, and even began dating again after years of putting romance on the back burner. Each new connection helped me understand what healthy relationships should feel like, mutual, respectful, with natural give and take, rather than constant sacrifice. News about my parents came primarily through Sarah. They had been forced to dramatically scale back their expansion plans, closing the deal on a much smaller second location than originally intended. The bank had restructured their loan with stringent oversight requirements. The hardware store survived, but their dreams of a multi-location empire had been permanently scaled back to match the realistic projections I had always advocated. 4 months after our coffee shop meeting, my mother sent an email that was different from her previous attempts at contact. There were no demands for reconciliation, no subtle guilt trips, just a simple acknowledgement. "We failed you as parents, not just in these recent months with Jake, but for years before that, taking your support for granted and never giving you the same unconditional backing we gave your brother. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I recognize the harm we caused. It wasn't a complete accounting of everything that had happened, but it was a start. The first genuine acknowledgement of their role in our estrangement." I responded briefly, thanking her for the recognition and suggesting we might speak by phone the following week. That call was awkward, painful at times, but also the beginning of something new. Not a return to our old relationship, but the tentative formation of something potentially healthier. "The store is smaller now," my mother told me during that first conversation. "Your father had to let go of some of his bigger dreams, which has been hard for him. But there's something more solid about what we have left, more honest. 2 more months of cautious phone conversations followed before I agreed to visit, not staying in their home, but at a hotel in town. The hardware store I walked into that Saturday morning was indeed smaller, the expansion having been scaled back to a modest addition rather than a separate location. My father now handling the register himself instead of delegating to staff they could no longer afford, looked up as I entered his face, a complex mixture of shame, regret, and fragile hope. "Renee," he said simply, coming around the counter but stopping short of embracing me, respecting the boundaries I had clearly established in my emails. "The store looks good," I offered, noticing the tidier displays and more focused inventory. "More streamlined. We had to make adjustments," he acknowledged. "Your mother keeps the books now. She's gotten quite good at it, though. Nowhere near your level of expertise." We talked about neutral topics as he showed me the modest changes they'd made, neither of us mentioning Jake or the loan debacle until we were seated in the small office at the back of the store. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, looking down at his weathered hands. "A significant one. I allowed your brother to manipulate me because he told me what I wanted to hear. I chose fantasy over reality, and in the process, I lost something far more valuable than any business expansion. Why did you cut me out so completely?" I asked the question that had haunted me for months. "After everything I'd done for the business for both of you." He was quiet for a long moment. "Jake suggested you were trying to control the business from Boston, that you didn't trust us to make decisions without you. He said we needed to prove we could succeed without your oversight." My father's voice broke. I was so eager to believe we could expand, to believe my son had finally embraced the family legacy, that I accepted his version of events without question. "It wasn't oversight," I said quietly. "It was support. It was love." "I know that now," he admitted. "After everything fell apart, I kept thinking about how you had never once let us down, not in 30 years. And the first time you raised serious concerns instead of listening, I cut you off. The conversation wasn't easy, and one talk couldn't heal years of imbalanced family dynamics. But it was a beginning. We agreed to move forward with clear expectations and boundaries. I would not be financially involved in the business again, but I would be willing to occasionally offer advice if asked respectfully." In the months that followed, I continued building my independent life in Boston, while cautiously rebuilding a new kind of relationship with my parents. They respected my boundaries, never pushing for more involvement than I was comfortable giving, acknowledging that trust once broken required time and consistent effort to repair. I also found unexpected purpose in my experience. I began volunteering with a financial literacy program for young women, teaching them about maintaining good credit, understanding loans and debt, and most importantly, establishing healthy financial boundaries even with family. "Your credit score is not a family resource," I would tell my students. "Your financial well-being matters as much as anyone else's, and you have the right to protect it." Standing in front of a classroom of attentive young faces, sharing hard-earned wisdom about financial independence and self-advocacy, I found healing that therapy alone couldn't provide. My painful experience had given me insights that could help others avoid similar situations. As for Jake, he was eventually located in Arizona, arrested and charged with fraud and embezzlement. My parents chose not to press additional charges, a decision I disagreed with, but respected as theirs to make. The legal consequences he faced from the business fraud were significant enough without adding family complaints. The experience transformed me in ways I never could have anticipated. The pain of betrayal and exclusion forced me to examine deeply held beliefs about family obligation and self-worth. What emerged was a stronger, more centered version of myself, who understood that true love, whether in family or other relationships, should never require the surrender of your boundaries, your voice, or your financial security. So have you ever had to stand up to family for your own protection? Let me know in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people we love most, but as I learned, they can also be the most important for our well-being. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening, and remember, protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for creating authentic, healthy relationships that truly last.